Canton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, starts right now.
There was no court today, and if you're keeping count, you know Monday will mark week 7 of the testimony in the Karen Reed case, and it is still in the hands of the Commonwealth tonight. Thank you for joining us. For Canton Confidential, I'm Glenn Jones. J.C. Monahan has the night off. Let's get you caught up. So far, the prosecution has called 55 witnesses. There are 87 names on its witness list. This week, the jury heard from 5 of those people. That includes forensic scientists, as well as a state police lieutenant and sergeant. A large portion of this week's testimony focused on physical evidence. We saw new photos of the shards of apparent plastic from Karen Reed's SUV taillight, new surveillance video from Canton PD, and the clothes John O'Keefe was wearing on the night in question. Despite all of that evidence, there are still a number of questions left unanswered, and you seem to agree. In the past 24 hours, we've received a massive wave of questions from people who have been following the trial and our coverage. So tonight, we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. Kicking off our coverage tonight with some of the latest developments from Dedham is our Eli Rosenberg. Eli, court was not in session today, but you still have some important updates.
And Glenn, one of the biggest questions hanging over this trial is, will he or won't he, when we talk about Michael Proctor, the lead detective with Mass State Police, possibly testifying in this trial? We now know he will. But talking with a defense attorney not associated with this trial at all, he says if Proctor was his client, he would tell him not to say much.
Jack.
It was another major moment in a trial full of them.
A mirror image, Sergeant, is not an accurate video of this, is it?
Objection.
Surveillance video in the Karen Reed murder trial thrown into question. Reed's attorney saying the video appears to be mirrored.
And the impact of this video is that they flipped the taillight from view. So the taillight at issue, the right rear taillight, is not visible.
And that is important because that taillight on Reed's SUV remains the focus of intense scrutiny. Prosecutors say it cracked when Reed hit her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, back in late January 2022. Reed's lawyers counter, saying it happened here when she accidentally backed into O'Keefe's vehicle.
Is this thing about the mirrored video? It didn't have to be such a big deal. There may be a legitimate reason, but for him to allow them to spring it as a surprise and to cast doubt on everything they've heard with respect to the preservation of evidence inside the Sally Port, it's an inexcusable error.
This, as we've also learned from Reed's lawyers, that Michael Proctor, the Mass State Police investigator who led the Reed investigation, will be called as a witness by prosecutors. But a former New York City prosecutor says, based on what we've already learned in open court, from the search of Reed's phone for compromising photos to text messages exchanged, if Proctor was his client, you wouldn't be hearing much from him when he's called to the stand.
If his lawyer believes that he's just going to tell the truth and he's being wrongfully attacked by the defense, so be it. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if his lawyer makes it clear to the court that he would make a blanket assertion of his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination on any substantive topic related to this case.
As the trial has wrapped for another week, Governor Maura Healey weighing in briefly during an event Friday afternoon.
You're the governor here, but you're also a resident. Are you following the Karen Reed trial like so many people in the community here, getting updates like everyone seems so interested in it?
I've certainly followed it, but, you know, I'll leave that to others, and including MSP, to speak more about the trial.
And since the start of the trial, prosecutors are not talking to the media while this case is ongoing, so we have not been able to ask them for their side. When we talk about that surveillance video from inside Canton Police, court resumes here in Dedham on Monday. Glenn?
Eli, yesterday I was reading this motion from the Commonwealth, which is attempting to keep a certain witness of the defense team off the stand. Can you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, so this was a motion filed yesterday after court was done and is related to a defense witness, a doctor who's planning to testify. Those marks on John O'Keefe's arm, those marks have been much debated, are consistent with an animal attack. Prosecutors said that she should not be allowed to testify. The defense wants to call her as a witness. So there's going to be a hearing on that first thing Monday morning, another thing to watch as we enter what promises to be another busy week.
Glenn.
I think the Commonwealth is going to argue that that witness was added too late. All right, Eli, let's see what happens on Monday. Back in studio now with us is local attorney Morgietta de Riziere. It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Why don't we start on that last point? So prosecutors say, hang on, we object to this person being on the witness list because it wasn't disclosed at the start of the trial where most witness lists are disclosed. Do they have a point?
They do have a point, and especially when you're doing any type of litigation, but especially in criminal defense, it's not supposed to be a surprise. Everybody puts their cards out, and you're supposed to prove what you think you can prove. So presentation of late witnesses is actually unfair because you need to prepare. What if they wanted to depose them or ask them questions or investigate them in their credibility? So the prosecution has a really good point on that, and it's kind of unfair to the defense to put it forward now.
But the thing we can't gloss over here, Morgietta, is that this witness would testify about whether or not the injuries on John O'Keefe's arm could have come from an animal, maybe even a dog. That's a big question to get answered.
That's a huge question, and actually could be part of their defense, right? And part of their strategy. And I'm curious as to, what in pre-litigation happened as to why they didn't present that before. But that's key to the defense's case if there's another reason to explain some of these injuries, right? And I think it's going to be interesting how the judge rules on allowing this witness to testify so late in the game.
All right, that's something to look out for next week. Another big moment from this week was the inverted or mirrored video presented by the prosecution without noting that it had been flipped, right? Here's a question from one of our viewers on that point. This is Rhonda in Quincy. She says, with Thursday's testimony about the inverted and time-altered video of the Sally Port, is that reason for the case to be dismissed or mistrial declared? Doesn't altered or false evidence infringe on one's right to a fair trial? Morgietta.
So, this is a really, really important piece about conduct, right? So both sides, prosecution and defense, have rules of ethics that we're supposed to abide by. Mm-hmm. And what they're talking about is a grave injustice, that would be to Karen Read if, in fact, they had evidence not only that was tampered, but tampered to their favor. So it's very possible they could get a dismissal or mistrial by misleading the jury, which is a huge no in criminal defense.
Even if it wasn't intended?
So here's the thing, intention is hard to prove, right?
Sure, yeah.
But they will be able to identify who had the video in play, how long did they have it, how was it uploaded. So there are ways to find whether or not it was intentional or not. So they do have to point to that particular element, but the fact that they're raising it, goes to the defense's point about Karen Read having this confidential cover-up, but it also goes to the fact that, hey, maybe someone was a little bit sloppy and didn't notice that before. So either way, it does it really good.
Right. This is a good discussion, all spirited by our viewers who are asking great questions.
Great questions.
Yeah, really good questions. Yep. All right. There's still much more ahead here on Canton Confidential. Coming up, we're answering more of your questions, and our courtroom insider will join the conversation. A reminder, if you have a question for one of our experts, send us an email at canton.confidential@nbcuni.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Morgietta de Riziere is back with us again, but so too is Sue O'Connell, our courtroom insider and commentator. Let's continue on with these questions because they've been so good. But first, let's set it up with a clip. Sergeant Buchanan was on the stand for much of this week, and one of our viewers noticed a moment that may have been overlooked by many of us, but we have some really curious visitors. So watch this video. We'll propose a question on the other side.
Trooper Proctor, you were notified.
I am not Trooper Proctor.
I'm sorry. No, you're not. Sergeant Buchanan.
Sergeant Buchanan.
How do I say it?
Buchanan.
I'll give that a shot.
It's fine.
Buchanan?
Yes.
Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
If I screw it up again, please.
Now that we've refreshed your memory on that moment, Rose wants to ask this question. She's very inquisitive. She says, I am no attorney, but do you really think that Attorney Jackson actually called the other witness Proctor by accident? So you've commented on what a showman Alan Jackson is. Do you think that was calculated?
No, I don't, because now that I'm sitting there watching these people for 20 days now at least, his body language made it clear that he made a mistake, because I think that if he had done it intentionally, which might have been wrong, but if he had done it intentionally, I think he would have taken a beat. And instead, he was just coming up to the podium and he was asking the question. And you could tell he was a little off his footing with the back and forth there, because he had called him correctly by his name properly before. We know there's a name out there that we don't want to say by accident out there that's out on the Twitter sphere. So you could tell he was a little off his footing. The jury actually laughed. The court laughed. And I think sometimes, even if you've got you tell me better than this, a witness that is not on your side, it does ease it up a little bit and does make it easy to ask questions. So.
Well, you kind of highlighted a larger point in your response. Trooper Michael Proctor. We've heard that name so often. We haven't heard from him yet. Do you think the state ultimately calls him?
I think they have to. I mean, not only have they been baited to call him pretty much at this point, but there are a lot of missing pieces that if they don't call him, the defense is going to absolutely call him. And that I don't think is going to look better for them. So I think they should call him first.
Well, you know what's interesting? 3 for 3 from our analysts, Sue. Both Michael Coyne, Catherine Loftus, and now Morgietta are saying, although he may be a liability to the Commonwealth's case, better to call him than to not.
Well, it's like any problem in life, and our parents have taught us this, right? If you know something's coming down the pike, you need to get ahead of it, you need to deal with it, you need to plan. He's definitely a problematic witness for the prosecution. He's also a crucial witness for the prosecution. What he says on the stand, if he takes a fifth, if he is very evasive, if he answers questions that aren't asked, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's going to be an explosive day when Proctor takes the stand.
No doubt about it. All right. Sergeant Buchanan testified to his initial thoughts on John O'Keefe's injury, saying he believed O'Keefe may have been hit in the face or involved in a domestic incident. This is a question from Arlene. Why hasn't a medical professional been asked how John O'Keefe died? Hit by a car or beat up? It's an interesting question because we know there's someone from the medical examiner's office on the witness list, but we haven't heard from them yet.
Right.
And you expect that we will.
We will, absolutely. And we talked about this earlier, about the strategy of the prosecution and the order in which they're calling people. And sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. And I think that question really is why. But they will have to call a medical professional that will point as to the cause of death.
You know, and Glenn, we won't know if the strategy that ADA Adam Lally is using is correct until the end of the trial, right? And then even if there's an outcome that the Commonwealth doesn't want, if we get to speak to the jurors, then we will get more information about it. But I do think, I've said from the beginning, if I were telling the story to the jury, I would be saying, drank, drove, reckless, death, these are the injuries, here's the evidence. That's not what Adam Lally is doing, so we'll see if it works.
All right. This next question is one many of us have been wondering regarding the court schedule. This is from Joe. With so many potential witnesses still to be called, why do they have so many days off? Another viewer added to that, asking who determines the schedule. Has the schedule surprised you, Morgietta?
It has surprised me, but it also has not surprised me. And I think I said this in previous segments, that the court does have other business, unfortunately, that they have going on. But the jurors also need a break. I mean, I don't know any of us that could work full time without a break on something so crucial and intensive for many, 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 many days on end. So a lot of it is to give them breaks. A lot of it is to hear other cases. And I think that's the reality of why there are so many breaks in this case.
At the end of court yesterday, Judge Beverly Cannoni said to the jurors, I know there's a question you all have, and they all leaned forward, when is this going to end, basically? And the way it stands right now, she expects they will be able to have the complete case by the end of June, which means that takes us into July. Then you have the 4th of July week. I don't know.
I think the inference we should really make from that question, people are so hungry for this trial. I mean, they wake up every day wanting to see it progress, and when it doesn't, they get frustrated.
Right.
Absolutely right.
Sue, Morgietta, thank you. Earlier this week, we heard from forensic meteorologist Danielle Noyes. After the break, she returns to Canton Confidential to answer your questions. Stick around. We're back in just a moment. Thank you for staying with us on Canton Confidential. As you know, we are covering this trial in depth like no one else. Earlier this week, we had on Danielle Noyes, who is not only a local meteorologist, but is also a forensic meteorologist. I heard from more than a few people who said her segment here this week was so helpful. So what is forensic meteorology? Well, it is the use of a trained expert to go over historical weather data to reconstruct conditions for a specific location and time. She joined us to talk about the night and morning in question. Here is a look back at her appearance.
So light snow began around 10:30 p.m. on the 28th.
Okay.
Light snow, 7-mile visibility, which it's light. It's like flurries.
Light.
That's
and
not
in the
that
chronology,
bad.
they would still be at the bar at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, midnight. 30 degrees, 29 to 30 degrees is the temperature. Interestingly, a cold front came through right around midnight that night. After that, the temperature continued to drop through the overnight, and there was a big storm center that passed south and east of Nantucket. That was what caused all of the snow and the blizzard conditions.
So midnight, this is a critical time period. This is when everybody starts to migrate over to the address in Canton. When that cold front came through, we know it brought the cold air. Is that when the intensity picked up on the snow?
So the intensity reported at Norwood Airport was just over a mile from the location to the north and northwest. Reported light snow at midnight, but the visibility had dropped to 1.25 miles. So think about it, went from 7 miles to 1.25 miles. So it had steadily picked up and had been snowing at that point. Through the overnight, it continued to be light snow, with visibility around or just over 1 mile through the overnight period. I know 6 a.m. is a big time frame of question.
Sure. Right.
The temperature at that point was about 24 degrees. So it continued to drop through the overnight. The wind, by the way, which obviously is a big concern, was gusting between 20 and 30 miles per hour. It had shifted behind that cold front, so it really whipped up through the overnight. Heavy snow was reported starting at 8:20 a.m. at the Norwood Airport right nearby.
So the intense snow was in this time frame. The intense snow really was after Mr. O'Keefe was found.
So JC and I there were hanging on her every word because she was explaining it so much more clearly than we've heard so far in the trial. That appearance sparked a lot of interest and a whole bunch of questions from our viewers. So we read Danielle Noyes the general theme of those questions, especially given the testimony this week. She helped us to answer the questions now. Take a look.
It's less common than you think for a couple of different reasons. Number one is, they want to preserve the evidence. So introducing, what may be a heat source could contaminate that evidence. It could also damage the evidence. They certainly wouldn't want to do that. Instead, obviously, sometimes these investigators have special tools to either brush it away or be able to shovel it away. Melting snow can take a while. And in this case, obviously, it was a blizzard. And they had an epic amount of snow. It measured it in feet, 30.9 inches in one town over. So this was a little bit of an extreme scenario in terms of the snow that fell. You do have to kind of wait it out. There are special tools that can obviously melt snow, but in this scenario, it's not like they were trying to melt a couple of inches. The snow was in feet. And the other factor is there was blowing and drifting because this was blizzard-like conditions. It was a verified blizzard in southeastern Massachusetts. So the city of Canton had gusts 20 to 35 miles per hour the entire day on the 29th into the early morning hours of the 30th as they were doing those kind of initial portions of the investigation. So there was a lot of blowing and drifting that occurred that may have resulted in some issues with the evidence as well.
So after that information, you may want to go back and look at this week's testimony, including when evidence was collected from the scene. It's all on our website. To find that information, along with a rundown of viewer questions we've already answered, head to NBC10Boston.com and click on the Karen Reed tab at the top of the page. You're watching Canton Confidential. If you've been following the Karen Reed murder trial, you're not alone. In fact, it's a big club. We recently spoke with criminologist Dr. Scott Bond about how a murder trial in a suburban Massachusetts community can grow into a true crime headline and how that can affect the case.
The Karen Reed trial, first and foremost, I think triggers empathy, the psychological and emotional feeling of empathy. And what I mean by that is we as humans are drawn toward both the good and the bad. And I think we identify with both the victim and the alleged perpetrator. It's not the O'Keefe murder trial. Now it's become the Karen Reed trial. She's become iconic. She's become a media icon, a celebrity of sorts, a celebrity of the day, you might say. And as such, that takes the focus of the story and the attention of the public off of the crime and the victimization of O'Keefe and puts it on her. We should be concerned about justice here. We should be concerned about justice for John O'Keefe, for his loved ones, for his family. But instead, we see this now as the Karen Reed story.
As we wrap up the 6th week of testimony, we want to leave you with this reminder. The victim in this case is John O'Keefe. He was a veteran officer of the Boston Police Department. Several witnesses in this trial have called him a good brother, a great friend, a loving uncle who was the full-time parent of his niece and nephew. John O'Keefe was 46 years old. That's all the time we have tonight for Canton Confidential. We'll be back here on Monday.